that we sent on email is that the Nairobi City County Government, in collaboration with UNEP and support from KARA, the Kenya Alliance of Resident Association, have embarked on a process to put in place the NMT policy, and motorized transport policy. And this is an initiative that has come from the realization that we really need to have NMT infrastructure in place. And as you all know, the nature and the status as it is now is that there is no any clear policy in place to guide investment in NMT infrastructure. And so for the next 2 or 3 months, the 3 partners are going to look at putting in place a policy in place, and we have our consultant engineer Tom Opio who will be able to guide that particular process. So a number of activities are planned for that period, which I'll talk about at a later point. But basically for today, what we are looking at is to be able to have a stakeholder engagement to start looking at what exactly our expectations when we talk about NMT policy. What are the issues that we need to see in those policies? What are the processes that we expect as stakeholders? And how can we be able to give our contribution to ensure that at the end of the day, we have a document that can be able to say, represent our expectations and the needs of this particular city. So we expect that we'll be able to actively be engaged and to contribute actively to the processes so that we can be able to kick off the whole initiative in a way that represent the views and expectations of the stakeholders. There are people who have done quite a bit in terms of issues of urban transportation. There are people who already have interacted with aspects of NMT, maybe in other countries, and you could be having a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge that could be able to contribute to the effect of this, to the conclusion of this process. The consultant definitely is also well grounded on the issue of NMT, but we definitely also need contribution and input from other stakeholders who also have some information that they want to share with us. And that will be able to ensure that we have a document that we can all be proud of. So without taking much time, ladies and gentlemen, I want us to go straight to the program for today. And I want to request Engineer Mudama just to come and make some brief remarks from the Nairobi City County government perspective on what the plans they have about the NMT policy, and perhaps also how they'll be able to ensure that the output of this process will be able to see the light of the day in terms of implementation and in terms of making sure that we start seeing a change in the city in regards to issues of NMT. So, Engineer Mudama, please come.
I'd like to take this opportunity to say that I'm actually representing Engineer Mugunda, who was supposed to be here this morning, but he had to take care of other emergencies that have taken place. And I'll just be reading the document that he had prepared to discuss this morning. First, we want to thank UNEP and KARA for engaging the Nairobi City County government to come up with this policy, because we know that as a city, county, NMT is one of the paramount specifications that are required, especially for transport. And looking at the constitution of the Nairobi City County, which is established as per the constitution of 2010, the Kenya, we know that one of the default functions of the county government is public transport. And we know NMT, non-motorist transport, is one of the most public transport uses. And therefore, it is one of the key areas that as a county government, we are looking at trying to enhance so that we can realize good and proper public transport systems. Do we have a justification for the policy? Yes. We know that, for instance, 47% of all modes in the city are by walking. And that really shows us we really need to think about the NMT, how are we going to take care of them? Of course, in the past, we've been able to do that. We have provided, to some extent, some facilities for NMT, but of course, we realize they are not adequate to cater for all the provisions that are required in every aspect of the city. And therefore, what will be the objective of this policy? First, it will be to harmonize the initiatives of different agencies that are providing the NMT facilities in the city, so that we can set criteria for prioritization, the construction, and also maintenance of these facilities. We need to develop specifications and standards for NMT facilities, and also accommodate social and environmental matters that will also improve the urban landscape in the provision of these facilities. We also take note that we need also to improve our capacity in terms of the county to develop appropriate facilities that even the stakeholders are able to use, and will be able to facilitate proper transport within the city, and also improve the quality of life as we move along. And therefore, as we think about developing of this policy, we notice that, as I've mentioned in the past, the county government has developed facilities, for instance, footpaths. In all the road projects that we have provided at least some measure of walkways, and in the normal case, we normally provide just about 2 meters. The question is, will that be adequate as a footpath for people in a city which is crowded as Nairobi? So we need to think about standards like what would be a minimum footpath in the CBD, or what would be a minimum cycle track in places even where we are now trying to encourage also cyclists and such other modes. Even the way now Kenya National Highways Authority is also developing footbridges along the main highways. What would be appropriate when it comes to development of such footbridges, so that the pedestrians are able to use these footbridges, and we are able to integrate everybody into accepting to use these, so that they are also safe for everyone, and even everybody can accept using them. We have seen, for instance, on Thika Road, when the footbridges were provided, people were still crossing over in a very dangerous way. Therefore, this calls for interaction with stakeholders, so that also they accept that these facilities are there and should be used. Therefore, the issue of safety also comes in. And therefore, the Nairobi City County is pleased by this contribution by UNEP and CARA in support of this policy as a partner. What are the plans for the county government in provision of NMT? You notice we have already started a measure of provision of NMT facilities. For instance, the county government has a number of projects within close to the CBD to provide NMT facilities. For instance, community to CBD along Haile Selassie Avenue, Museum Hill through Arethuku, and Haile Selassie Avenue to CBD. These are areas where the county government is looking at small measures of providing NMT facilities that will enhance transport in those areas. And therefore, as moving on, the county government is looking at this program, especially the policy development in these areas. It will be able to review challenges in provision of NMT. It will also look at the collection and analysis of data that relates to NMT which may not be available, and how we can go about collecting such data, and also being able to identify appropriate NMT routes, establishing the non-motorized transport demand for the various routes, because this is not available. We may have some information, we know some corridors, for instance, Kibera to industrial area is one of the corridors that would want, but what is the demand related to other corridors? Also, we need to set criteria for prioritization of NMTs and also dedicate funds for development and maintenance of NMT facilities. You realize a lot of times with the funds that are allocated to the road sector, we just look at, first of all, the road, which really is providing for only the car, the motorist. Our projection, or even the data we have, shows that only 29% of all travel modes is by the car. So, as a county, you notice we have a challenge, because we are only providing for a very little percentage of the modes, and therefore the policy will really help us to see how we can appropriately dedicate funds for NMT. As I mentioned earlier, preparation of standards to facilitate uniformity of NMT facilities. That is lacking, and that's why the policy will be appropriate in assisting the county in this development, as well as other partners in the sector. And also make adequate provisions for using technology such as ITS in accommodating non-motorized traffic. So in this regard, we note that a consultant has been brought on board that will assist CARA, UNEP, and also the county government to come up with the policy. And this is welcome, knowing that also the consultant is a local consultant who understands Nairobi well. He also lives in Nairobi, and therefore will also be expecting quite a good document that will be able to make use in the next few years. So in conclusion, what are we saying? This initiative has the support of the county government, especially the governor, who has demonstrated that he's taking leadership in this area in the provision of improving transport in the city. And therefore, as we improve transport, we also want to improve facilities that will assist the public make use of the transport infrastructure. The partnership in development of the NMT policy is a clear indicator of the benefits of pulling resources together for service delivery in order to quickly achieve intended results through such synergies. And therefore, as I conclude, we, as a county government, we encourage all the partners and stakeholders to bring ideas so that we can develop a policy that will be useful, a policy that we can implement, and a policy that will assist the county government in achieving the goals in providing transport infrastructure, especially for the 47% mode that is rarely considered in development of transport infrastructure. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the United Nations Environment Programme, it is my pleasure to welcome you here and to thank you for your commitment in helping to initiate this policy development process. I would particularly like to thank the county government for their vision and commitment, and in particular Engineer Musama, who's here today at such short notice, so thank you for coming. I'd also like to thank CARA, led by Henry here, for all the excellent support they've given us so far. This particular policy development process was endorsed or was requested by the governor himself, as I believe the engineer mentioned. So we are very excited to be a part of this policy development process. But we do have a challenge in the length of time that we have to deliver. So thank you to Henry and his team at CARA for being so proactive and energetic at doing that. I think I wanted to give a little bit of context about this policy. I did have a list of statistics that I was going to go through, but I think the group here today are all very familiar with the challenges that we face. And I think that I can summarize that by saying I think that we're very aware that the opportunity we have in helping to design this policy addresses three fundamental pillars that currently face many challenges in Nairobi. And that's the road safety aspects of NMT, that's the accessibility aspects, so that's linking effective non-motorized transport facilities to public transport and to facilities and services that we all need to access in Nairobi. And thirdly is the environment pillar. And that's how can non-motorized transport contribute to the challenges we face, both in terms of local and in terms of global greenhouse gas emissions. So I think we at UNEP really believe that to address these three pillars, we really need to look at a shift within government policies towards more sustainable transport. And these factors, this triple bottom line, is really the driving force behind UNEP's Share the Road programme. And the goal of this UNEP Share the Road programme, which some of you may know and others may not, is really to catalyse policies in government and donor agencies. And at the end of the day, that's to ensure that there is systematic investment in walking and cycling infrastructure, ensuring that that investment within infrastructure is linked very closely with public transport systems. So that's what UNEP really is aiming to do through our Share the Road programme. And that really is the background to why we're here today in terms of UNEP's agenda. I would just like to briefly summarize the policies and commitments that already exist, which this NMT policy will be housed within. By that I mean the UNEP and the East Africa commitments. And there are many of these, but there's two which I think are particularly interesting that we should recognize. And one of those is the Nairobi Agreement, which is an outcome of the East Africa Better Air Quality in Cities workshop, which was a regional workshop held in 2008. Now this workshop and the agreement that came out of this workshop did very much include non-motorized transport. And this was in three primary areas. One aspect was to encourage the use of non-motorized transport systems, which are often, as we know, currently overlooked. The second area was to create interfaces between non-motorized transport and public transport systems. And the third was to encourage attitude change amongst users, to encourage non-motorized transport and public transport. Now this Nairobi Agreement in 2008 was obviously much broader than specifically or purely focusing on non-motorized transport. But what I think is quite clear is that many of the other issues within the agreement have had more focus than non-motorized transport. So I think that we need to remember that many of these commitments are in place and we should be building on them. The second commitment, if you like, or initiative that I'd like to draw your attention to is the Africa Sustainable Transport Forum. Now, this forum was held at the end of October of this year, and the secretariat which led the forum was composed of World Bank, UNEP, and UN Habitat colleagues. And out of this forum, which was a Pan-African forum for those of you that didn't attend, an action plan with time-bound targets did emerge. And within these time-bound targets, there was two specific actions that focused on non-motorized transport. One was the development of an NMT policy, and the second was the development of supporting design guidelines, which is something that the engineer has already given recognition to in his welcome address. And the reason I draw attention to this Africa Sustainable Transport Forum agreement is this is a pan-African commitment, which is inclusive of non-motorized transport. So I think that currently we're at a great point in time where we have pan-African commitment, we have regional commitment through agreements such as the Nairobi Agreement. We also have a national momentum that has started to build, and now we have commitment also from Nairobi County Government. So I think it's really time that we take all of this momentum into account, and we really work towards collaboration and bringing everything together. And as Henry said, we really also look not just at the policy context, but how we're going to implement this. So finally, I would just like to assure Nairobi County Government and all stakeholders here of UNEP's support and commitment towards Nairobi and Nairobi's non-motorized transport policy. And I very much hope that once we have a policy in place, the county government can work with UNEP and with CARA and with other partners to try and ensure that this policy is rolled out across other counties and also national government in Kenya. So thank you very much.
I just want to take us through very briefly what we see as the journey that we're going to walk to put this particular policy in place. As we mentioned earlier, we have very strict timelines to work with. I think when this discussion started with the governor, he was very straight and very keen on making sure that we have the process completed in the shortest time possible. Actually, he had wanted the document to be placed by end of January 2015. But we've been able to have a follow-up discussion thereafter. So what we are looking at right now is that between now and end of February 2015, which is 20th February, I believe, we should be able to have a policy document in place that has gone through the various stages and processes and has been endorsed by the stakeholders and the various key players as a document that meets our expectation. So you can clearly see that we have quite a bit of work to do. I think some of us will not even enjoy our Christmas break because we'll just be looking at how best do we make sure that everything is in place to drive this process forward. But to make us, to ensure that we have the policy in place, we have a number of stages that are going to look at. A number of them is going to be driven by the consultant himself, but of course, as CARA, as a facilitator, we also have a number of activities that are going to play. So we have the aspect of putting the planning bit of it and just having the correct data in place, which is the part that the consultant is going to be very interested and keen on. And even this workshop is part of a platform where we expect to get some information that will be able to impact positively on that particular process. So we are going to have a process of getting quantitative data information and as well as the qualitative data information. And this will involve looking at what exactly has been done in relation to NMT policy process and even urban transportation in general, and reviewing what we have existing and ensuring that we are able to get some useful information from that. And this includes looking at existing policy and regulations that relate to the work that we are doing. on issues of traffic laws enforcement and supporting policies. But also having sessions with key stakeholders just to get to understand from them what exactly are the issues that we need to look at. And this will include perhaps the consultant having sessions with like interview sessions with some of the key players in the transportation sector, both from the government, the civil society, the academia, and even the private sector, who in one way or the other have an interest or have participated in issues touching on NMT and urban transportation. So that will be able to get us to the point where we have data and we have information that can then be able to serve as a basis of putting together the policy document. But as a way of ensuring that we have stakeholders' engagement and participation, which by the way is now a constitutional requirement, we really don't have a choice. We must be able to have a very extensive input from the various stakeholders to ensure that we comply with the constitution, but most importantly, have a document that has a rich mix of input from the various experts and various stakeholders. So as CARA, we are going to organize a series of platforms, stakeholders platforms. And the first one is what we are having today. And this one we are calling it a kick-off policy, kick-off stakeholders policy. So this is the first of the activities that we are having in this process of putting together the policy. And the main issue today, as I mentioned earlier, is for us to appreciate or to get the input from the stakeholders on what exactly they expect about the process, what they expect about the input, and what they expect the framework or the policy document to look at, to look like. So we are going to have an interactive session where we'll be able to give you an opportunity to give us a response on that particular aspect, so that as we live here, as the consultant goes to start putting the document together, he has an indication or an impression of what exactly are the issues that we need to take into consideration. Of course, he already has some kind of framework on the things that he wants to focus on, but this we want to subject to your interrogation and your input so that we can be able to enrich it. After this particular workshop, and still in the spirit of having platforms for stakeholders engagement, we are going to have another stakeholders forum, maybe towards the end of January, beginning of February, where we are going to now look at what we are calling a draft document. So it means between now and around February, the consultant is going to be at work, of course, with CARA and UNEP, to put together a document based on the various processes, looking at the qualitative data, the various interviews that are going to conduct, and have some kind of a draft document that we can start looking at as stakeholders and start providing a critique. So we are going again to call you back for this kind of a forum around end of January, beginning of February, just to present to you what we've come up with as a draft policy document, and get to hear your views in terms of the content and in terms of it reflecting the expectations that you have as stakeholders in this particular process of NMT development. So at that particular time, Engineer Opiyo is going to make to us a presentation on what he's been able to put together. But the main idea or the main aim of that workshop will be to ensure that we get back to you and you give us feedback on what if the document is representing some of the issues that are even going to raise in this particular meeting, and if it is something that you'll be able to gladly say that represent the views of various stakeholders. Thereafter, we are going to go back to work again to incorporate and to reflect on the issues and the views that have been brought up at that particular forum, and ensure that we improve the document in a way that reflects those particular views. And we expect to yet again have another forum where we are going to look at what has been done in terms of the approved document and agree or even disagree with it, because it's not automatic that if we say that this is a document, we are going to have a buy, we are going to agree with it. We are going to present to you what we've been able to put together, up to you to indicate whether that particular document reflect the issues and the views that are talked about. That basically is some of the steps that I was talking about. But beyond that, as Kara and NEP, we are also looking at another session, what they are calling the NMT Investment Forum, which now we are going to focus on the aspect of NMT investment in terms of priority, the prioritization, funding, and the stakeholders' input in terms of making sure that we drive the NMT policy towards the implementation. Like I said, we don't just want to have a document and then say that that's it, that we are done. We want to engage in this process, and if at a time we are able to start seeing some kind of impact on the ground based on the provisions of that particular document. So we are still going to work with the county government, we are still going to work with the stakeholders, we are still going to work with a number of players to ensure that we have the document implemented and we are able to see some of the provisions of that document being implemented. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the kind of a scenario that we are going to have in the next couple of months, and we expect that this engagement will continue not only in this room but even online. One of the things that I also want to bring to you is that we are going to have this conversation even on email, and Askara will set up a mail serve specifically for this particular initiative, where we can be able to get input on email and online as much as possible, because at the end of the day, we want to give everyone an opportunity to really tell us what they expect and support this particular process. So that's how we are going to work, and of course, if you have suggestions or ideas on how we can be able to maybe improve that or how to be able to enrich it, we definitely will be happy to listen from you. So having said that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to request Kali Koinange from UNEP just to give us a bit of a background on what exactly the NMT policy, and look at some of the maybe issues that we need to have at the back of our mind as we walk this particular journey. So Kali.
So we thought it would be worth just taking a step back really and thinking about and kind of coming to a consensus in this group about what we actually mean by a policy and what we actually expect it to do. There are, we talk about policies and strategies and work plans and implementation plans, and what we see, if you like, as what we're talking about with this policy is a document that the county government for Nairobi say this is our view on non-motorised transport for Nairobi, and this is what we will do for the city, and this is the policy we will use across the county when we make decisions that impact cycling and walking in Nairobi. And critically, what the policy needs is something that underpins it. So some type of strategy and action plan that says this is what we're going to do in the next year, this is what we're going to do in year 2, in year 3, this is where the money's coming from, or this is where we're planning on finding the money, and who's responsible. And then that policy can then be used to communicate through various different instruments. So you can take that policy and you can communicate it through laws, in partnerships, in contracts. It appears in the budget, it's used to change legislation. So it's really a starting point that sets out the intent of the government in consultation with other stakeholders. And this is just a list really of what we kind of see as some of the content in the policy at a generic level. Tom will talk much more about the policy statements and what we want to see in the policy for NMT. I think one of the things that keeps coming up again and again is that the policy is just the starting point. If you ask yourself the question, does a policy make a city walking and cycle friendly? The answer is generally no. It's not the policy that actually does that. So the types of things really that we need as well as this policy is the political commitment, and political champions, it's great to see that we have that from the Governor of Nairobi. We need good infrastructure, we need a budget, we need money available to do what the government say they'll promise in the policy. And other things such as having a dense and compact city where there's congestion, where cycling and walking actually works out cheaper than taking a car. So it's all of those things that make a city walking and cycle friendly. It's not just the policy is just the starting point. And of course the other thing is the attitude to cycling and walking generally, and also the attitude from us as stakeholders to the policy. So if we write this policy, it is the best NMT policy that's ever been written, but we don't use it, then we haven't succeeded. So just as we go through this process, we just want to be thinking of those things. And I just wanted to finish really with, if you like, a bit of a case study. So Chennai is the capital city of the Indian state of Tamil Nadu, and it's actually known as the Detroit of India because it has a huge automobile industry. It's the third largest city in the country with a population of about 8.5 million. It's a growing city, it's a growing developing city, so it has lots of issues with urban pollution, traffic congestion, poverty, overpopulation, road safety. And interestingly, the Lonely Planet has identified this city as one of the top 10 cities in the world to visit in 2015. So it has a really big tourist industry as well. So if you like, there are definitely some synergies there with Nairobi. And what's really interesting about Chennai is they developed an NMT policy in 2012, and they talk about their mission 2018. And basically what their policy says is we will allocate 60% of transport budget for the whole city to NMT, and that they will build safe and continuous footpaths for 80% of the population, and that they will increase the share of walking and cycling trips by 40%. And finally, they want to completely eliminate pedestrian and cyclist deaths by 2018. So they had a really good, these are just some of the highlights. They had this fantastic policy with really clear targets. But what they actually did was they made their policy a reality. So with some of the kind of same contextual situation as Nairobi, they actually made some really big changes. So they became basically reclaiming road space, and these images are before and after pictures. And you can, we talk a lot about gold standard, world-class standard NMT facilities, but what we actually need is just a great space that people can walk, so you can see the difference. And it's not that there's lots of kind of add-ons and like beautiful pavements, but they've just made a real difference for their pedestrians and cyclists. So they started off, they completed work on 26 streets, and they decided to prioritise footpaths that were alongside bus routes. And their next phase will be extending the project to another 65 streets, and they'll continue this process. And they won an award at the recent India Urban Transport Awards for Best Street Design. And this is just the last kind of one of the other streets, and you can see the changes they've made. So in finishing, let's really work together and craft a policy that we can be proud of, and then let's go even better and let's use the policy. Thank you.
Let's clap for the whole of that team from the first one to now. I think they have done a good job, isn't it? But you have been very mean with your clapping. Just do as if you don't want this policy to take place. And we have just seen the power of having a policy with clear targets, isn't it? And then with the commitment. Now it is our time to engage. Anyone wanting to pick up the space and ask, and let us follow the good practice that the teams have done. They have been very brief to the point, isn't it? So you have an issue, just let's keep on to that one so that we can move on very quickly. Anyone wanting to time for interaction?
Be brief, yeah, with the last presentation regarding Chennai, what were the preconditions that made this policy take off that are absent or are needed for this to happen in Nairobi? Thanks.
My name is John Kioli. I work for Green Africa Foundation. I also chair Kenya Climate Change Working Group. Mine is not a question but a complimentary note that a lot has been done already on the ground. My organization, supported by UN Habitat at Bashish there, we had a project last year, and one of the things we did, we had a baseline survey for Nairobi, whereby we identified a lot of gaps that would be useful to this discourse. For me, I think it's good that this project now carries over from where most of these organizations in this room have already done, so that we don't reinvent the wheel. We are happy as Green Africa Foundation to offer these documents that we have, so that they can be useful to this document. And I think as we do this, we should also mirror to the national policies so that we don't over-concentrate on Nairobi only, but also look at the gaps which are there nationally, so that the other counties are able to borrow from what we have already done. But I really am happy with this organization. I'm happy with this initiative that has been started. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I would like to thank UNEP for this initiative and Kara. What we are expecting, I think, is to see a policy that is able to be implemented in a short time with clear targets as we expect. Maybe I'll have a lot to discuss when I've heard from Tom Opio what he has to say. I think then we'll have a good discussion at that time.
Excellent. Good.
Regarding the Chennai case study, fundamentally there was a political commitment there from the Chennai Corporation, who made a decision as a government that to prioritise pedestrians and cyclists over car users. So if you look at some of the case study pictures, they had a positive impact on cyclists and walkers, but if you like, a negative impact on taking road space away from drivers. So that was the critical thing, the political commitment. And one way you could look at it is, even if that policy didn't exist, maybe some of these things would have happened anyway because of the political will. And the second thing, which is linked to that, is they identified and had an NMT-specific funding stream in order to support the policy at a starting point. And then within the policy itself, they even made a bigger commitment that all future budget for transport would be 60% towards NMT. So those were two critical things.
Basically, this is based on what we are doing at the moment, working also with UNEP and also within our broader program at the University of Nairobi. We've been part of a center of excellence for public and non-motorized transport in Africa. That brings University of Cape Town, brings University of Dar es Salaam, ourselves, and within Kenya, we've worked with Maseno University, Kenyatta University, and Jomo Kenyatta University and Kenyatta University in terms of supporting students who are also entering this area. That is because this area seems to be very exclusive and was like more of just engineering. Leave it aside, it's not an area that others should get into. But in recent times, a lot of people are also contributing to the process, which is good. So what I'm going to share with you is basically our study on institutional framework of NMT in Kenya, which are basically our primary findings. I'll also try not to bore you with the issues that have been already raised. I'll run over the ones which I feel that have been raised and we can discuss later. Apart from giving a brief conceptual understanding of it, we will also focus on at least tell you what we are doing with UNEP, then the methodology, then the preliminary findings. What are we having? What is coming out? In terms of conceptualization, I think we have all agreed that this is crucial. That has been said. I don't want to belabor it. Majority of people are walking, irrespective of whether you are going to join another mode or not. So that makes it more prominent and very important. And of course, we know cycling is not that much, but cycling is also on board. But even those who cycle, whether they are cycling alone or getting into the other modes. And of course, in Africa, the cost of transport is an issue, and that again includes the pool of walking. So indeed, there is a need to look at this area, and in looking at it, the issue of having a direct route, making it attractive, comfortable, and safe, which Africa is still far from getting to. It's never safe, it's never attractive, but at least there is somewhere to walk. Maybe that we might do when going forward. In terms of how we are performing, I think generally there has not been institutionalization of NMT provision. It's like close to ad hoc. We've seen ad hoc intervention, and when we sit here waiting to talk about policy, it just makes some of us really, really happy, because we've written it, we've said it's a gap, and now we are seeing it being rolled out, and soon we will be seeing more commitment beyond the ad hoc interventions. My only question, which I would have asked if I had raised my hands earlier, is I've not seen any any member of county assembly here, I don't know at what time you bring them back up, or Ukara will give them a special forum, because we've known across Africa, sometimes policies will fail. Opio, Tom, my colleague and friend, might do a very good job, but that policy may not see the eyes of the County Assembly of Nairobi. These are experiences which are real. So it's good to work with the County Assembly members, let them start buying in, because this is really about buying into the ideas. So I hope I'll see them along the way as we continue this process. So indeed there is a need for comprehensive understanding of actors and drivers of this process. And that's why we took this study, for us to understand the actors and drivers of NMT infrastructure development. And also to appreciate the existing constraints and to provision, because indeed there are constraints, especially in taking different regions, resources that are available and that. This, if I was asked to only say one thing, this is what I would have put on table. Sorry, the other hook that hooks implementation and desired end is not there. But this is the ideal. This would be an ideal that one should have if you were to achieve a desired goal, which is at the end. In other words, there must be a vision. And as I talk about this figure here, my question is, we've also been getting it that it seems the national government is developing an NMT machine, is that right? Is there an idea or someone developing an NMT policy somewhere, or these are confusions? Some people have been saying that the national government is also developing an NMT policy. An ideal way one would have to have, first of all, even that vision. That vision of what do we want to have like in Nairobi. We know Nairobi is growing, Nairobi is all over. You know, it's in Ongata, it's where, and of course, in terms of mobility and access, you are connecting people to their, activities and functions. So you need that big picture of what you want to see, that framing on top there. And then when you have the policy, or when we will be developing the policy, some of those clarities needs to be made so there is very clear focus. And of course, after that, we had in the morning about, so what after policy? It's not an end. You can still see that you have the other side of the figure, where you will have to have the right laws, you will have the right regulations, and not just regulations enforcement. And the other side, you have to plan properly, you have to allocate resources, where many times you don't even move when the people who allocate resources decide to make you not move. And of course, last, then you implement. If you do that, then you can have a desired end. As to whether African states or Kenya or Nairobi City is able to grapple with this and have this ideal is another issue. In our country, many times you pick one of this and run away with it, and you stop there. So the planner might be very aggressive and might want to plan. They will plan, but they won't go far with planning. Somebody might feel I need to allocate resources, but there has been no planning, there is no policy, there is no regulation, you can't do that. So there is a lot of that not gelling together to get to the ideal. That is the reality. So going forward, we will be moving towards, do we achieve some, maybe half of this, or at least 3/4 of this, so that we approximate the ideal. So that's where we are moving from in terms of understanding this study. In terms of the study that we are doing with UNEP, that is the frame that we want to understand it in. And of course, it's institutional mapping of organizations and related institutions which play a role in either conceptualizing, planning, implementation, or governance, and funding of NMT infrastructure. In other words, we are trying to juggle with understanding the whole terrain of NMT within the bigger framework of infrastructure, and more so road infrastructure. Of course, our justification is that there is dearth of knowledge on NMT, is not adequate, and the institutional dynamics which inform the provision or lack of provision needs to be understood. Issues of project, the whole idea of this project was we designed it in a qualitative manner, so we are doing a qualitative study, getting in-depth institutional analysis, and we've moved quite in terms of doing that. The methodology, as we've had, I think, even in the NNT, there will be a lot of review of literature. Definitely we'll share with Opio, hopefully, because we've quite tried to review already, both secondary and empirical. And the empirical has been sometimes very difficult to get. Documents exist, but sometimes they are not released, but we are succeeding so far. Our meeting that we had around table on the 2nd of October helped a lot, where we told the development partners and stakeholders that we need these documents. They are for learning for our other project on Thika Highway, which we call that forum a learning for inclusive road infrastructure development. That has really helped. We've managed to access partners, development actors in a more enabling way than we would have done if we didn't have the first forum. Of course, we developed a checklist of issues and we've gone into interviewing, and so far we've covered about 9-10 institutions, and we have something to share, and that's what I'm doing here. In terms of preliminary findings, I think these are the knowns, but the issue is, do the knowns exist when we talk about road infrastructure? I think things like bridges, people get very easily culvert, food bridges and the rest. How about bus stages? Are they part of the equation? Are we providing for them? Sometimes I remember when I was a young person growing in Nairobi, the bus stops were very proper and very, very proper, and we went to them. Today, I no longer see them. I see people stop wherever they can, and that has a lot to also do with NNT, because those are the points where NNT picks up the other modes or so. Lane marking or marks, of course, are very, very important. And of course, if policy is right, if we get it right from the work that we are beginning to do, then we will be able to determine which way we want to go for Nairobi. I do not know how that will fit later into the national perspective, but for this level of government has to move, and will move irrespective of the other level. Hopefully, the other team will join on so that other counties can also have what to pick in terms of a national perspective. The issue of motorized transport, focusing on motorized transport and changing to an integrated mode is already happening. Is an attempt. There is an attempt to ensure that modes are integrated, but of course without policy you cannot get that. It's critical and it's very important that agencies are conscious of the need to provide NNT infrastructure. At no point did we talk to anybody who was not conscious that there is this need, which we see as a real positive. Of course, the NNT dedicated infrastructure remains a wild dream. In our analysis and interviews, it seems that to think, in one of the interviews, it was one of the partners saying that is just not something we even think of. You can integrate it, but to just have the dedicated infrastructure where you come up with it, I think the engineers will explain what or Pio, you will have to explain what I don't have a language for. But I guess you are getting what I mean. What I mean, yeah? You get what I mean about a dedicated, yeah? We cannot afford to have dedicated. People talk about the need for that, but at the moment it's not easy to have that. We can only do those retrofits and think of NMT with a road, with a motorized road. But the ideal is, can we think of that person coming from Kibera, from Korokocho, and give them their path, their route into where they want to go, without necessarily thinking of a road. This is what I'm juggling with. I'm not an expert on that area. Okay, issues of it's cheaper. It's argued that it is cheaper to integrate the NMT mode as opposed to having it as a dedicated lane. And of course, the issue of this integration is now mandatory. It's close. What we got from the interviews, it's close to mandatory. There is no development partner today who will come with designs which does not consider NMT. And even at the ministry level, they audit these things and they want to see how is NMT provided for, which we see as very, very good progress in terms of going forward. Okay. The ministry, of course, is very responsible in terms of, we find conceptualization of road infrastructure is happening. There may be inadequacies, but it's happening, and working with a number of partners. Of course, identification of need and availability, issues of safety, of road usage and segregation of users to minimize conflict are right on table and are being addressed. And of course, the importance of NMT directness is a question mark. As we do this, are we concerned about the directness, the attractiveness, the comfort, the safety, and the environmental friendliness? Those are question marks. You start that discussion and it's not flowing as the others. So there, we still have to work hard on that. Issues of old roads, which had no NMT, but currently being proposed, especially for urban roads, so that they are retrofitted at least with something and approved. That's also quite a positive. Of course, there are limitations in ensuring provision of NMT and infrastructure. As I've mentioned, issues of financing, issues of land, and of course, retrofitting, which is now also creating its own other issues, resulting in narrow footpaths, steep footbridges, or gaps or breaks, of which are not user-friendly. So it's like we are in a catch-21 where at least we want some NMT provided, but what can we compromise? As we come up with these policies, there are a threshold. Are we going to have some threshold that is agreed on, that no evaluator will come and say that the city is putting a bogus NMT? The city will defend itself by saying, we know that the ideal is 4 meters or 3 meters or 2, but we settled for 1.5 because that's what we could afford. Those clarities don't seem to be on table, but they are necessary so that Kenya accepts that, yes, we know the best is this, but we are opting as a nation to go this way. Maybe incrementally we may achieve a better option, but as per now, the issue of ideal versus reality sometimes is very difficult, and there is need for that compromise as we come up with a policy. Issue of actors who are handling NMT policy, I think the issue that we have not had a policy, we quite know all of us. That is what has resulted into lack of harmonized approach, standard design. Hopefully there is that argument that if you had clarity and direction, all this would be harmonized. And of course, even the elitist approach, which prioritizes motorized transport, you can't blame it because there is no direction. Once there is direction, we are hoping that this will be reduced or will be completely a gone case. And of course, we argue as researchers that as we approach post-2015 sustainable development era, we need to really begin doing things differently. Hopefully Nairobi will be a model, because definitely, as I heard Henry Ochieng talk, by March, June, we should be having this policy in place, and therefore we can see 2015 in a very new light. We already have the integrated national transport policy, which is a positive, and as you can see, it appreciates all those that has been our concerns, at least in policy. That transport policy basically mentions all that we need to hear. It acknowledges that there is no pedestrian footpaths, separate lanes for cyclists, inappropriate models, split institutional deficiency, and lack of vision for transport sector. So that in itself is a very good beginning point in that policy, which can then be picked up. And also it's the same policy that provides for the counties to develop, to work, to be the ones responsible for ensuring that there is NMTs provided. Of course, prior to policy, NMT was not recognized as such. There was nowhere you could read how we recognize NMT. But since 2012, when that policy was passed, we can now rethink what we wrote prior to that, because that is now done. And of course, current transport policy direction, development and maintenance of infrastructure for NMT, which is supported by all county governments and road agencies, that is also provided for by that policy. All positives. But lack of NMT and urban development policies has been a bottleneck as it is. We don't have it, and we get this out by June, July, this bullet will no longer be on our table. Policy will clarify definitely choice between car dependence and public transport dependence. Or will it be a balancing act? We leave that to Engineer Pio, whether we want to balance it or whether we want to make clarity of choice over there. That, to me, has to be decided in that policy. And of course, NMT policy development, as we know now, is in initial thinking stage. But the urban development policy, and I saw Adolwa coming. Adolwa? Did I see Adolwa? I didn't see Adolwa, no. He talked in the other forum. But the urban development policy for this nation, I think, is also advanced. And it's very critical to NMT policy. Is there anybody who can tell the forum again where that is? Uchin? The urban development policy. It is a very unfortunate situation, Gaby, you know it, because this policy is being said that it is like ready, but when you ask people that you think should know about it, nobody knows about it. Very, very problematic. Anybody who knows about urban development policy? Gaby knows. Just tell people very briefly what you know about it, because this is how Kenya doesn't move, because everything is muddled up.
I know a lot about the policy because I was extremely involved. It is very heartening that after using public resources and doing everything on the policy, you have it completely completed. In fact, there's nothing like second stage. It is actually ready, but of course, where the ministry...
Not ready. We would have it. These people would have it.
Okay.
It's in second stage of thinking.
Okay, whatever that second stage means. But as far as I'm concerned, the policy was completed, all the policymakers were involved, everybody was involved, and of course now with the change, I think that's where the problem is, with the change of government, of course the priority of the ministry is titles. So and that's why it is suffering. We are looking for what it is. So one of the things that actually needs to be done is if there are people who can lobby for it to move on. There's actually nothing else that you need to add on that, because the previous parliamentary group committees went to Mombasa and that facilitated those processes. They were all there. It was actually due to that people going to cabinet and so on. So it's one of those things.
Thank you, Gaby. Last week or two, I was in Safari Park with the county officials, including the chair of the council, and nobody raised a hand that they knew about that policy. Adolwa was in the room. He tried to talk about it, and people just said, we don't know about that policy. This just tells us that we need to do more. It doesn't say that the output is bad, and is also a lesson to us as Opio develops this policy, that if people don't know about it, it can be problematic at the end of the belt. And that's really what needs to be done. I know it's as ready, that's why I say second stage, it was done, but it's not been passed. When you come to urban development policy, I think that's okay. So consequences of lack of policy, again, we've done that. Issue of international standards, which standards are we using? This is something we have discussed a lot in the interviews, or some of you may be here that we talked to. Which standards? How then, if we don't have direction, what informs us? If we don't have manuals, what informs us? But we hear people talk about international standards, specific partner development standards. So maybe if you are African Development Bank, or if you are EC, or if you are UN Habitat, or UNEP, whoever the partner, that is your standard. It's not, then you have Kenya government standards, developed maybe in the 70s or the 78 one. Then you have some people who just say loosely, local standards. So in other words, we don't know. It's all over. All of those apply, depending on who you are talking to. And I think it's very difficult to piece it out. At this level, we can just list all of them. Hopefully, we will be able to gel it to close to saying this is really the dominant. Maybe not. Maybe just that there are several standards being used. So there is no specific standard. I think that's what we can say. There is no specific standard. One development partner said that in quote. That's why I put it in quote. No specific standard used. Or specifications on project basis based on contractor. Some of them are just based on contractor. And of course, some stakeholders are aware of UNEP standards. There is even UNEP standards, and are occasionally used, these standards. So development partners again came out very clearly that development partners are trying to harmonize existing standards, which again I think was very positive, that the different development partners that are on infrastructure try to harmonize what they're doing and how they're supporting the country. Of course, no studies and manuals guiding NMT development exist as such. Issues like pedestrian counts, which are useful for informing designs, are hardly done, although we know that Metropolitan Nairobi is very advanced with doing something quite innovative in terms of research. Nairobi Metropolitan, when we talk to them, they are quite advanced with coming up with some real meaningful study. They were at commissioning stage a few weeks ago. Probably they have commissioned or soon to commission. And that is the array of range in terms of standards, or whether it's rule of thumb or so. And that's what I was referring to earlier, that if we say it's 1.5 or it's 2 or 3, or maybe we don't say, engineers can tell us this, and again, I throw it to Opio when he comes on the table, whether it's necessary to specify, or whether it is what Engineer Mudama talked. I liked your points a lot about when you said, let us know what applies for the city center, let's know what applies for the other suburbs. So I'm even learning that you don't need to have it standard, but you have to specify what applies where. Of course, in terms of existing manuals, largely out of date, and probably you also see poor designs occasionally resulting in redesign of NMT after provision is found unsuitable. And of course, we also have heard that a development partner is assisting in updating of standard design manual with information on design, size, and safety aspects. So these are important points to just note as we develop the policy, that a lot is going on that we need to learn from. Of course, consultants are the ones being used as benchmark. So, Tom Opio, we are benchmarking you, and I don't know what you are benchmarking. You are benchmarking Kenya time, Kenya style or Kenya perspective. But what is coming out in the study is that it's the consultants that become the benchmark. So if I'm a poor consultant, or if I come from a country that is not doing it very right, where quote unquote right is subjective, that is what you will see. So benchmarks as such are not available, but consultants really benchmark. Our development partners undertake NMT audit, which was very good finding. There are indeed audits, and those audits ensure that infrastructure plans respond to the vision of this country, including policies of inclusivity and sustainability, issue of social infrastructure, including clarity on how communities will access markets, livelihoods. These are questions that people who fund NMTs or roads are raising with the government or with the authority involved. Of course, issues of compliance with agreed set standards, agreed, whether it's local, international, Kenyan, or whichever it is. There will be somebody overseeing that there is compliance to that standard that is being applied for that project. Of course, there is evidence of public participation, but to a large extent, this is the requirement of public participation is pushing the government at ministry level to involve stakeholders. Of course, in some cases, to lose funding. If you have not involved stakeholders, you stand to almost lose or not get your funding. And then last, about there, Kara came out, Kara Ochieng, you came out that you are one of the organizations known to be at least lobbying and pushing for some of these things in collaboration with others, and I'm glad you've demonstrated it today. Of course, when you look at all this, you then realize that the public is doing a lot, the development partners are doing a lot, but what we note again is that the politics surrounding prioritization and budget is difficult to dig out. So even as we continue to conclude this study, we may not fathom the prioritization. How is a particular project prioritized vis-a-vis the other one? And how is budget allocated? What constitutes what component is very difficult to find out. And of course, I have talked about the Nairobi Directorate. They gave us an example of how they involve public, giving an example of Limuru, and issues of using professional inputs and consultants, development partners, and supervision. And of course, I want to go to the end because I am being pushed to do so. When we look at advocacy, which is very important, is largely lacking. National Transport Safety Authority has begun doing it, and of course, minimally also UN bodies and non-state actors are doing it. Some of you are in this room. Public meetings on site do occur in terms of participation so that projects can move well. And of course, there is minimal protection of NMT facilities from intrusion. And of course, we do think as researchers there is need to criminalize abuse of NMT facilities unless activities are factored in planning and design. Because we tend not to enforce. It goes back to what the figure I shared. And issues of planning NMT infrastructure with livelihood in mind should be put on table. Now that we know if you do the bridge, people will be trading on the bridge. Why don't you just plan the bridge with trade in mind? Is it not doable, engineers? You can do it. People will trade on those bridges and they're trading on them. So make those facilities available so that you don't spend so much money enforcing. That is a technical area. But we are saying if you are not to design it for other activities, enforce that there are no other activities. But if you can't enforce, then design it for other activities. Concluding remarks. There is a good environment. Good environment exists for NMT development. There is consciousness and acknowledgement of NMT. Urban development and NMT policy are in the process like we've had. Development partners are in support. Enforcement of compliance is happening through NTSA with support of other actors, and government and related agencies are beginning to champion NMT provision and governance. But there is competition for resources, and therefore there is need for advocacy and M&E so that at least NMT can get its space. There is also need for as this competition arises, advocacy from UN agencies and isolated, I call it isolated. There are not many state actors on this sector, very few for NMT, and those ones are doing their job well. And we also think there is need for training and reorientation of policymakers and bureaucrats, and also public awareness and reorientation. It's not just to blame the government and the county governments. The public, we stand to blame as well, and we need to be reoriented and awareness be created so that we do the right thing. Last but not least is research to support appropriate designs and implementation. Thank you very much, and sorry for...
I think, let me start by saying that I'm very happy to be here to talk about NMT. Some of you, I think you knew me as an NMT engineer long time ago. Elijah here, Kabala there, many people here. So I've been, let me say, missing in action for almost 15 years. And before I prepared this presentation, I was looking at what we did in 1995, 96, 2000. And you know, they're still relevant. They're still relevant. They still need to be addressed. So what has happened in the last 15 years? There has been some progress. There have been some interventions, but they are ad hoc. They are not planned. They are done because somebody says, put a footpath, put a cycle track. But I look at them and I say, this is useless. This is a waste of money. And in fact, you should not do it. So I think the need to have a policy has been elaborated on. I am happy with Prof for having gone through all that she did. It took a bit long and very interesting because I thought there needs to be some background information on why we need this. And I think she has covered them well. I hope we will share that information with you, with us, with me, so that I don't have to repeat what you've done. The only thing you don't have is technical ones. But we can make it technical.
Like if you say separated, that can be there. But you talk about NMT only infrastructure, where you don't have to design a network following the motorized. That's an NMT only network. Let's start. What I want to do is I have only 13 slides. And what I'm trying to do is to provoke discussion on the items I will raise. I made this very rapidly in less than 2 days. So there could be a number of things missing. But I think I've covered most of them, and I would like you to look at it as a discussion presentation so that the next 1 hour or so you'll be able to discuss them. And that's why I would not like to take a lot of time. The definition of NMT, I think, is quite, we understand that. But I think we need to add in not just walking and cycling, but also we can have cycle rickshaws where they have trailers behind. You could also have push carts. These are also forms of NMT. We could also have animal drawn carts. I know they are not there in the town, so we can leave that out. But this policy will cover walking, cycling, carts, trailers, and trailer-drawn carts, human-drawn. I know we don't like to talk about carts because they are difficult to accommodate as NMTs. So some of them have been like cars, like pickups. But then the space is always restricted. And we need to talk about what we want to do with them. And I think this has been said that this is the basic means of transport available to the majority. We talk about 47%, but I think many more people walk in between other modes of transport, and it could be much higher than that. Now the characteristics, just we need to understand that most of these NMT users are actually exposed to harm or destruction in a mixed transport system. And that's why most of the times some people talk about having them separated, given their own tracks. But that is not possible everywhere, so they need to be accommodated in a mixed transport system. And they should not be harmed or destroyed when they are in that kind of system. They are generally slower in an efficient, non-congested system, but that's not always the case. They are faster in a congested environment. Every morning I see pedestrians, and I try to time myself. I drive, and I don't pass the pedestrian. The pedestrian comes and passes. I never catch him. So we should not say they are slow. They are only slower in an efficient, non-congested system. They use human power. That means that their power is limited. So in terms of design or in terms of their consideration, we must say, why do you have to take a human being out, take all that energy, and not cross at the same level? The vehicle will not even understand it. Will not even know that there was a pedestrian under us. We take them up, we give them one amount of energy for them to go across the road, while the vehicle can easily go up without any issues. And then that's why we say our designs don't work, because we are expecting too much from NMT. They won't do it. How do you go up with a cart? Push cart. But they are often cheaper for short trips, which are most common in urban areas. It's cheaper to walk from here to my office, I know, than drive the car that I've been captive to. So, when we look at mobility policies, or we look at NMT policies, it is important to ask a number of questions. We should ask, the first thing is, what contribution is that policy going to make towards a preferred transport scenario? What is that scenario we want? What vision do we have? Are these policies that we have, that is like a checklist. The policies will come up with at the end of this process. We should ask and say yes or no. If it is no, then it means we should not even have that policy statement. Are they consolidating the strengths and exploiting the opportunities that are available in the transport system? If it is yes, then we leave that policy in. Are they preventing the identified threats and transforming weaknesses into strengths? We need to have a yes. If they are not, then that policy should not be what we are trying to develop. And then we look at what impacts will the policy make on future mobility. What is the NMT going to contribute, or those policies going to contribute to travel time reductions in cost, to affordability of the transport system, to the road space use. how is it going to improve the road space use in terms of what is the transport impact? How many people are going to pass through that cross-section? At the moment, we are passing very few people within the cross-section we have. What maintenance cost? Is it going to increase the maintenance cost or make it down? Sometimes it should make it down because if you don't use so many vehicles, the roads will last long. So all this could be up or down, but that we look at in terms of the impacts. What about the impact on the environment? Is it going to make the environment better or worse? We need it to make the environment better. We need to look at, are these policies compatible with expected land use plans, land use development controls? Are the policies consistent with the national, we have talked about the integrated national transport policy. This national transport policy, or this policy development, seems to come towards December. I was involved in 0203, I think 0304, developing the integrated national transport policy. We did have Christmas, we did have New Year, and it took another 10 years for this thing to come. 2012, I didn't know where it is, but I thought it was 2009. Now it's 2012. And it was like urgent. And you know who was the minister then? John Michu. It was urgent, like yesterday. Then it took 10 years, more than 10 years. Now this policy, we don't want it to go that way. This is also urgent, as UNEP has told me, the Henry here. It is urgent, it must be done. You know, I was telling my colleague there, I may not have Christmas, but it will take maybe another 10 years to start seeing results. I hope this is not going to be the case. And then we need to look at, do they address the lack of political will and vision to have good transport system? We need to have policies within this energy policy to ensure that whoever gets into political office implements it. And that would also be from stakeholder participation. If we have a policy, we can always ask the politicians to implement it. Today, the policies encourage model integration. We know that NMT has their own limitations. You cannot walk forever. At one time, you need to get into a public transport. At another point, you need to use your car because it's in the night. What do we have? Sometimes you need to use the commuter train. We need to have policies that encourage model integration so that NMT is not looked at as a standalone transport. It is working in a system. Now, can the policies be implemented? So we need to come up with policies that we know can be implemented and contribute to our transport system. And then the financing policies also need to be included. Now let me go to the outline of the policy now. Those were just some statements that we can use to check whether we are getting the right product. We need to have a problem statement, and what I think is that before a policy statement, we need to have a problem statement. And many of those problem statements are already with Professor Mitula there. I will just cut and paste and make them more technical, but also understood by everybody else. So the problem statements will be there. We talk about accident rates, we talk about costs of transport, the congestion issues, social exclusion, poor use of road space. I will just naming them, environmental impact legislation. So all this with their different points and the policy statement attached to them. Now we need to have a vision, and it should not be a vision of top. In fact, the vision should be that generated from the county government and us as residents. And that's why I like Kara to be there. They need to have a vision that is a common one, not just for those who will implement it, but also those people who will be monitoring that is implemented. So it should be something about quality, something about equity, something about accessibility. Those statements should be there. What do you want? What do you want to see? The mission. You can say, what is the purpose of this policy and what scope? We want to improve mobility, but for who? For everybody or for NMT only? Then we need to have strategic objectives, the goals we want. I know all of us know about SMART, and I think what we want is to increase modal share. We want to increase infrastructure coverage, especially for NMT. We want to reduce accidents. We want to reduce GHG emissions. We want to do so many things. we will have to not list 1,000 things, but maybe the most important ones. Then the leadership commitments. I think we need some commitments from the county government, how they will involve the users and stakeholders. Users and stakeholders are different. I could be a stakeholder here because I am a consultant, but I'm not a user. So we need to, if there's a difference there. Users also should be involved. Those people who walk, those people who cycle, those people who use public transport. And then they must also make a commitment. So a statement will be there that the county government of Nairobi makes this commitment that we will implement this policy. And then they also have to be the champions. That's what we have, what we learn in this country is champions. There are very few champions in road safety. I think the NTSA now is there championing this. But before that, there was nobody. Now the design principles of road design or the street design and management, I think multimodal transport, there should be a policy on that. We need to have a policy on that, that we are going to have our design based on what is called principles of universal design. You know, it should be for equitable use, for flexibility. They must be simple. Sometimes engineers complicate even a junction that the pedestrian does not know what to do when they reach them. They must be simple, that you basically know you are doing it the wrong way. It must be perceptible. It should be possible to see what the expected behavior. It also must give you tolerance for error, that even if you make an error, it's not going to be a very serious error. It's not going to result in destruction. They must have physical effort. That's one thing about our footbridges. They don't work because how do you expect a lady who is 90 years old, 80 years old, trying to make a survival aspect, walking all over, to go up 5.5 meters? That's what's created for the highways. Then go down again. I know that there have been some improvements in design, but the distance still too far. Why don't you take the vehicles that extra distance and keep these people at the same level? And then you people do not walk like that. People walk straight. They don't walk like this. They walk straight. Cars can move like, because once you design a road, what does the motorist have? The choice, no choice. The pedestrian still has a choice which is dangerous, to run across the road. Because you can't fence the road all over. So we need to have a design that, you know, recognizes the low physical, the need requires low physical effort because of those modes do not have that power. Appropriate size and space. It should also be possible to use it, you know, give the correct sizes. So policies that will talk about this will be in that in this policy framework. The NFT facility will need to meet user requirements. Again, safety must be ensured. Coherence, you must have complete and direct. If you have a footpath or a cycle track like what we build now, we build one on Lanata Road, we build another one on State House Avenue. How do you use it? What happens between Lanata and State House? You know, you are on your own. You'll be there before you reach State House, another safe place. So they must be comfortable. It should be comfortable to use. It should be attractive. Comfortable here, I mean, like, if you are out walking and you need to shop, you can't shop along the way because the traders are also not there. It's not a comfortable route. You have to make several detours to do shopping. What do we do to our vehicle motorists? We have petrol stations every few meters to fuel your car. Where do these NFT people eat if the street traders are not there? So we need to integrate those in our designs or in our policies as well. Again, this is the point I was saying, recognition of street trading as an important economic activity. These are the poor people trying to make a living. They are also feeding into the NFT. They are giving the NFT the energy to move. Can you imagine you shop as you go home, not detour to go and shop. So they shop as they go home. That means you recognize their weaknesses. You are actually making a challenge, an opportunity to give these guys, but of course they must be regulated. They must be planned. Enforcement is also necessary. Then the street design elements. You need to have policies on lighting, NFT routes, about trees. You know, you need shade, resting places, green areas, pedestrian-only zones. We need a place where even where there is no road, but you have only a pedestrian-only zone, or even cyclists only zone, NMT only zone, where you don't need a vehicle. So if you start planning from the motor vehicle to the NMT, you get it wrong. We need to look at issues of private car traffic management. Where should they park? Where should they be? Speed calming measures. How do you make roads that are used or streets that are used by NMT reduce speeds there? What about solid waste management? People walk and keep throwing things. We want them to have bins and everything along those dedicated routes. Washrooms. Where do you go when you are walking slowly, you are pressing, where do you go? A vehicle will drive you to a hotel or something else. This person will not walk in the hotel, you will be blocked by security. We need to have these things. They are small things, but they're very important to make routes attraction. We need to develop street design guidelines. I think we should not confuse that we only need engineering design guidelines. We also need how do we design our street. It's not just for walking alone, it's for movement, but you like to move along a place which is attractive. So street design guidelines also need to be there, just like engineering design guidelines to provide those facilities. Because as we look at strengths, we look at convenience, the way it's used, but how does the street look like? Where do we put what? Where do we use it? If you are sitting there, you sit with your leg on the footpath, how far should it be away from the expressway for the cyclists? All those things need to be there. We need to also, this point is important for continuity, develop citywide NMT networks. As I said, there are things you do and it's a waste of money. If you build a cycle track which is not continuous, it will not be used, it will not attract anybody. So why do it? Don't do it. So until we start having a city NMT citywide network, cycling will not happen. Even if, say, it is there, when you come to this hotel, where do you park your vehicle? That bicycle. It's not there. It's a vehicle. But I can come and park my vehicle. In fact, if you have a bicycle, you will not get into this hotel. You will not be allowed, because even motorcycles are not allowed. So, there are a lot of attitude change that we also need. But we need to have a complete network that have all those things in place to get this thing working. So this is where now we look at what Prof was talking about. We need to come up with principles on when to have mixed traffic. I don't know why you want to separate people on a street into a residential area. That pedestrians can walk away, but what about cyclists? They should be on the same, because they also help to reduce fast vehicles. Why do you want to separate them? When you need to separate them, we need to say, yes, this is a dangerous place, we separate the NMT. But then that separation should be taken into consideration their weaknesses, their challenges. Then the NMT spaces. We need principles on built environment regulations. How do we want to go ahead with new construction? What about redevelopment? We need to say, how many blocks do we have to build before you provide an NMT on route? For example, if you are in the city hall and you want to go to the DP's office, how do you go? You walk like the car, isn't it? You can't go through KICC, or whatever it's called. You can't. Because they ask you where you go. You say, I want to go to DP's place, go around. So insecurity has also created a number of problems. But even those people who are insecure, they come shooting. They don't come being checked. So why then do you force people not to do it? Enforcement of policy is important, and it's not only for those that employ NMT facilities, but also the NMT facilities users themselves. They need to be also, if the facilities provided, they should be used properly. We need to come up with policies for promotion of innovative NMT services. And here, we need to look at cycle and car sharing schemes. If I want to ride a bicycle just for a short distance, where do I get a bicycle? Maybe I don't need to own a bicycle for those two. But it should be possible to have that scheme in place. We need to have something like internet hotspots along NMT routes. This will even attract more people. Some people will come in and then use that facility because they want, I don't even know, it's almost like increasing patronage, hotspots, and also social interaction. Because if there's a hotspot, maybe I will stop my vehicle somewhere and get into that place, use the truck, maybe with time I get used to using it. Cycle repair shops. We have repair shops around goods, motorized goods, spare parts shops, for convenience and liability. We need to also have free bicycle parking provisions along energy routes, affordability and convenience. I remember when I was in Netherlands, if my bicycle got a puncture, I would just park it and lock it and keep walking. And the next day, I will take a train and come back and I'll get my bicycle. Something like that. Where you leave your bicycle, you can't keep walking with it. There's no help. So those kind of things we need on those kinds of groups. Now funding, I have some ideas here, policies that I want to develop policies on funding. Of course, as we told earlier in another presentation, the county government needs to have a commitment. They must say how much do they want to allocate for this, to implement this policy. And there are a number of sources, development approval fees, they can use rates and traffic fines, they can use the development budgets, transport development budgets. They can also use revenues from a parking management program. When you have a cycle cut higher, there will be some money generated, you can use that to develop energy facilities. You could also get sponsorships for cycle competitions if there is the first lady is making a lot of money from the runs. You can also have those and maybe use those kind of sponsorships to develop energy infrastructure. Street vendor licenses, if they are serving the energy, they would also like more of those to be developed. And then you solve another problem of where do I put street vendors? Put them along the routes you are developing. So you are creating for them market by developing that infrastructure. And then use their licenses to improve them. Speeding fines, these are, you want speeds to be low. Those fines, some of which should come into energy infrastructure. Then we need to ring-fence energy funds, like transport projects. When there's little money, the money you want to get, which is not so much anyway, is to delete energy routes, lanes. Obtain specific loans. I have not heard of anybody going to a development partner, like World Bank or African Development Bank, that we want NMT, we want a loan for an NMT-only transport system that we want to implement in a city. They have a lot of money. If you get the money like what, 7 billion that you want to use in outer road to improve energy, we'll almost have started building. But now we are only building a 10-kilometer stretch. We need to reduce, you could also think about reducing or waiving business licenses for private companies to provide energy infrastructure, or those that give incentives for their staff to use energy. Public education, let me not take too much time here. We need public information, tell them about the benefits, the plans, the projects, using before and after situations, cycling clubs, there are many things, competitions in schools, you can use this. NMT Road Safety Week, I know you have Safety Week, and NMT should also be included. Then we also need to set a user participation platform, what we have here, for information sharing. Lastly, we need good data. That good data is what informs planning and also cost implementation evaluation. That is something that we have. We don't have data that can help us make. We need to make decisions that are data rich, but that's not always possible. And it can allow you to do so many things there. Cost benefit analysis. When you want to go and borrow money from the World Bank, they need all that. You don't have data to do that. Now, what I think will be in the annexes is one priority action plan. We have several policies, but then what is our priority action plan that we want to, the policies we want to do quickly. So we need to have a prioritization criteria, we develop an application criteria, and then we should come up with a list for the short term, medium term, and what we want to do in the long term. And then a second annex, I'm thinking about this implementation actions for the priority action plan. Maybe the immediate group. And then where we link policies with strategies, activities, indicators, time frame, funding, and the rest. Thank you very much.
And this is to thank you very much for making this session very interactive and to ask Henry to take us home.
Give me some serious.
Thank you, seats. Thank you very much. I think Elijah deserves a clap. Let's talk for Elijah, please. He's done an excellent job taking us through the session that we had. And now we want to wind up so that we can go and attend to other businesses. So I want to thank all of you for the participation. I want to thank you for the contribution, for the useful information that you've been able to put forth. I am sure this will make our work easier now as we begin the actual process of putting the document together. You can be sure that all the issues that you've raised, the questions, the recommendations, will be taken into consideration when we are now working on the policy document. So in terms of way forward, and for those of you that maybe came after I spoke, is that we are going to start the actual crafting of the policy document with the guidance from the consultant, Engineer Opio. And we hope that we should be able to have something to look at by mid of January. What we are looking at is that we will again request you to come for such a forum sometimes end of January or early February, just to look at what we've been able to put together, how you've made use of your views in this forum, and how we've been able to put together a document that can be able to be subjected to your critique. So that will be the next step that we are looking at. And again, in order for us to carry on this discussion online, because I know there are still issues that might come up even after this forum, we are going to set up a mail serve at Kara specifically for this process. And the idea will be for all of us to be able to give as much information as possible, even after this forum, so that we can be able to continue improving what we are working on. So please, based on the email that you provided at the registration point, we'll include you on the mail serve, and we'll have an interactive session online where whatever information that you have that you come across that you think is useful to this process, you can share it with us, and we can make sure that the consultant have a look at the same and use it as part of the work that is doing. Again, I want to appeal to all of us that anybody who has any documentation, any information, anything that you think is useful to this process, please feel free to share it with us online, and even deliver it if you have it in hard copy. Because I know some of us have worked in this process before, and you could be having some kind of data or some information that can add value to this particular process. So please, we request that you share with us as much as possible to enable us include that on the report. Otherwise, I think from our end, just to thank you once again and ask you to please continue engaging with us, because this is just the beginning. We still have a long journey to walk in having the policy in place, and even after the policy is in place, we still have a number of things that we must do to ensure that we are seeing that particular policy being implemented. So you'll be hearing a lot from us. We'll be bothering you with meetings, with questions, with some kind of request to support us in one way or the other. So it's very nice, because I think at the end of the day, we are all working for the good of this city, and we all want to make sure that we have a livable city, a city that can all be proud of. So having said that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to invite you for a cup of tea. And since we might not meet again before Christmas, just to wish all of you a Merry Christmas, and of course a very productive 2015. So thank you very much, and tea is served just right behind where you are seated. So,